You're easily replaceable, Arisa. Don't forget that. That's what Evonne Thorne said to me, right there in front of the entire leadership team at Pinnacle Solutions. 12 senior executives sitting around that polished mahogany table, watching me like I was some kind of spectacle they couldn't look away from. I remember the way she dismissed my quarterly report, this thing I'd spent 3 months perfecting, pushing it aside like it was worthless paperwork. Then Evonne Thorne, Senior Vice President of Strategic Partnerships, the woman who'd built her reputation on ruthless efficiency, looked me dead in the eye and delivered that crushing blow. Anyone with half a brain could do what you do. You're nothing special. I'm Arisa Quinn, by the way, 31 years old, and at that moment, sitting there with my leather briefcase containing an $8.2 million contract that would change everything. She had no idea what I'd already secured or how spectacularly wrong she was about to be. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights in Conference Room C buzzed overhead like angry wasps, casting that harsh corporate glow that made everyone look slightly sick. I had been in this room hundreds of times over the past 4 years, but today it felt different. Today it felt like a courtroom, and I was about to be sentenced. 12 pairs of eyes were fixed on me as I stood at the head of that massive mahogany table, my quarterly performance report spread out before them like evidence in a trial. The senior leadership team of Pinnacle Solutions, the company I'd poured my soul into for 4 years, sat in their expensive suits and designer dresses, waiting for Evonne Thorne to deliver her verdict. Evonne sat directly across from me, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the polished wood. At 47, she was everything the corporate world told women they needed to be: sharp, successful, and utterly ruthless. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, not a strand out of place, and her charcoal gray Armani suit probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She'd built her reputation as Senior Vice President of Strategic Partnerships by being the woman who could close any deal, crush any competition, and eliminate any obstacle in her path. Today, apparently, I was the obstacle. "Let me be very clear about something," Evonne said, her voice carrying that particular tone of controlled disdain she'd perfected over 2 decades in corporate America. She picked up my report, 3 months of meticulous research, analysis, and strategic planning, and held it between 2 fingers like it was contaminated. "This work is subpar. Mediocre at best." The room was so quiet I could hear the air conditioning cycling through the vents. I felt heat creeping up my neck, that familiar flush of humiliation that I'd learned to suppress during my years climbing the corporate ladder. But this was different. This wasn't just criticism. This was a public execution. "Furthermore," Evonne continued, standing up and walking around the table with the predatory grace of someone who knew exactly how much power she wielded, "I question whether you understand what quality work actually looks like in this industry." Miles Taylor, the CFO, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Lyra Harborfield from marketing kept her eyes fixed on her laptop screen, probably wishing she was anywhere else. Even John Hall, the CEO who'd hired me personally 4 years ago, sat stone-faced, offering no intervention, no defense. I stood there, my hands clasped behind my back to hide the trembling, feeling like that scared 27-year-old who'd first walked into this building straight out of graduate school. Back then, I'd been so grateful just to have a seat at the table. Now, 4 years later, with my track record of successful partnerships and revenue generation, I was being torn apart in front of the same people who'd praised my work just months earlier. "The Henderson account analysis you presented last week?" Evonne's voice cut through my thoughts like a blade. "Incomplete. The Morrison partnership proposal, lacking critical market insights. And this," she gestured dismissively at my quarterly report, "this is the kind of surface-level thinking I'd expect from an intern, not a senior partnership manager." Each word felt like a physical blow. I'd spent countless nights working on those projects, missing dinners with friends, canceling weekend plans, pouring everything I had into proving myself worthy of the promotion I'd been promised. The promotion that now seemed to be slipping away with every syllable Evonne spoke. "The truth is, Arisa," she said, returning to her seat and leaning back with the casual confidence of someone delivering a death sentence, "you're easily replaceable. Don't forget that." "The truth is, Arisa," she said, returning to her seat and leaning back with the casual confidence of someone delivering a death sentence. "You're easily replaceable. Don't forget that." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had just consumed everything I had worked for. Easily replaceable. As if 4 years of 70-hour weeks, of building relationships with clients who specifically requested to work with me, of generating millions in revenue for this company, meant nothing. "Anyone with half a brain could do what you do," Evonne continued, her eyes locked on mine with an intensity that felt almost personal. "You're nothing special. This company has survived long before you arrived, and it will continue to thrive long after you're gone." I felt something crack inside my chest. Not breaking, exactly, but shifting, like tectonic plates finding a new position. The room seemed to tilt slightly, and for a moment, I thought I might actually pass out. But then, through the fog of humiliation and disbelief, I felt the weight of my leather briefcase sitting on the floor beside my chair. My briefcase, which contained something Evonne couldn't possibly know about. Something that would change not just my position in this company, but the entire trajectory of Pinnacle Solutions itself. I looked around the room at these people I'd called colleagues, some I'd even called friends. Lyra, who I'd helped land the Morrison account 6 months ago. Miles, whose budget projections I'd personally validated when the board questioned his numbers. John, who'd told me just last year that I was the future of this company. Not one of them met my eyes. Not one of them spoke in my defense. "I see," I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. I reached down and picked up my briefcase, feeling the weight of the documents inside. "Thank you for the feedback, Evonne. It's been illuminating." Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, that I wasn't crying, or arguing, or making a scene. She'd probably expected me to crumble, to beg for another chance, to prove her point about how weak and replaceable I was. Instead, I gathered my materials with deliberate calm, placing each page back in its folder with the precision of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The room watched in uncomfortable silence as I straightened my blazer, smoothed my skirt, and walked toward the door with my head held high. "Where do you think you're going?" Evonne's voice carried a note of irritation. She wasn't used to people walking away from her lectures. I paused at the door, my hand on the handle, and turned back to face the room. 12 pairs of eyes stared at me, waiting for my response. Evonne sat forward in her chair, clearly expecting some kind of dramatic breakdown or desperate plea. "I'm going to make a phone call," I said simply. "It's going to be a very important phone call." And with that, I walked out of conference room C, leaving behind the suffocating air of corporate politics and false loyalty. I walked out carrying my briefcase, my dignity, and most importantly, the $8.2 million contract that Evonne Thorne was about to learn had already been secured. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that in 15 minutes, everything was going to change. I made it exactly 15 steps down the hallway before my legs started shaking. Not the confident stride I'd maintained in that conference room, but the unsteady gait of someone whose entire world had just been turned upside down. I ducked into the nearest bathroom, set my briefcase down on the marble counter, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. Arisa Quinn, 31 years old, Senior Partnership Manager at Pinnacle Solutions. At least, that's who I was 15 minutes ago. Now I wasn't sure what I was anymore. Let me tell you who I used to be, before Evonne Thorne decided to publicly humiliate me in front of the entire leadership team. I was the girl who grew up in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Brookhaven Heights, where my mother worked double shifts at the textile factory just to keep the lights on. My father? He'd disappeared when I was 8, leaving behind nothing but unpaid bills, and a mother who taught me that the only person you could count on was yourself. "Success isn't given, Arisa," my mom used to say while counting tips at the kitchen table after her second job waiting tables at the all-night diner. "It's earned. One day, one choice, one opportunity at a time." I carried those words through 4 years of state college, where I worked in the campus library to pay for textbooks and lived on ramen noodles and determination. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in business administration, not because I was naturally brilliant, but because I outworked everyone else. While my classmates were partying on weekends, I was studying. While they were sleeping in, I was at my internship at 6 a.m., proving that the scholarship kid from Brookhaven Heights deserved to be there. That work ethic followed me to graduate school, where I earned my MBA in strategic management while working full-time as a research assistant. I learned to function on 4 hours of sleep, to smile through exhaustion, and to never, ever let anyone see me sweat. I was driven by a simple philosophy: work twice as hard as everyone else, be twice as prepared, and eventually you'll earn your place at the table. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. 4 years ago, when John Hall offered me the position at Pinnacle Solutions, I thought I'd finally made it. Pinnacle wasn't just any consulting firm. It was one of the most prestigious strategic partnerships companies on the East Coast, with clients ranging from Fortune 500 corporations to emerging tech startups. They specialized in connecting businesses with each other, creating synergies that generated millions in revenue for all parties involved. I started as a junior partnership analyst, the bottom rung of the ladder. While other new hires complained about the long hours and demanding clients, I thrived. I had something most of them didn't: hunger. Real hunger, the kind that comes from knowing what it's like to have nothing and being terrified of going back there. Within 18 months, I'd been promoted to partnership manager. By year 3, I was senior partnership manager, managing a portfolio of clients worth over $50 million annually. I had my own office on the 32nd floor, a view of the city skyline, and a salary that would have seemed impossible to that girl counting ramen packets in her college dorm. But success in corporate America, I learned, wasn't just about performance. It was about politics, relationships, and navigating personalities like Evonne Thorne. Evonne had been at Pinnacle for 12 years when I arrived, and she'd made it clear from day one that she saw me as a threat. Not because I was better than her, I wasn't, at least not initially, but because I represented something she couldn't control. I wasn't part of the old boys network she'd spent decades infiltrating. I hadn't gone to the right schools or grown up in the right neighborhoods. I was an outsider who'd earned her way in, and that made her nervous. For the first 2 years, our relationship was professionally cordial. She was my supervisor, I was her ambitious subordinate, and we coexisted in the careful dance of corporate hierarchy. I did my work, exceeded my targets, and kept my head down. I thought if I just performed well enough, worked hard enough, delivered results consistently enough, I'd eventually earn her respect. Evonne was naive. The shift started about 18 months ago, when I landed the Patterson Industries account, a massive manufacturing conglomerate that had been on Pinnacle's wish list for years. I'd spent 6 months cultivating a relationship with their CFO, attending industry conferences, sharing insights about market trends, building genuine trust. When they finally signed with us, it was the largest single contract in the company's history at that time, $3.2 million over 2 years. Instead of celebration, I got suspicion. Evonne questioned every aspect of how I'd landed the deal, suggesting that Patterson Industries had only signed because they were, quote, taking a chance on fresh faces. She restructured my responsibilities, assigning me a mentor, one of her longtime allies, to help me manage such a significant account. The message was clear. My success was an accident, a fluke that needed oversight from more experienced hands. But I kept working. I kept delivering. I brought in smaller accounts that turned into bigger ones, developed partnerships that generated recurring revenue, and built a reputation with clients who specifically requested to work with me. I thought my track record would speak for itself. I thought wrong. Standing in that bathroom, staring at my reflection, I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. Evonne Thorne was never going to see me as anything other than a threat to be eliminated. It didn't matter how hard I worked, how many accounts I landed, or how much revenue I generated. In her mind, I was still that outsider from Brookhaven Heights who didn't belong at her table. But here's what Evonne didn't know about me, what none of them knew. Growing up poor teaches you survival skills that privilege can't buy. It teaches you patience, resourcefulness, And most importantly, it teaches you never to put all your eggs in one basket. For the past 6 months, while Evonne had been systematically undermining my position at Pinnacle, I'd been working on something else. Something bigger than any account I'd ever landed, bigger than any promotion I'd ever sought. Something that would change not just my career but the entire landscape of strategic partnerships in our industry. I opened my briefcase and looked down at the documents inside. 3 separate contracts, each one representing a piece of the largest partnership deal in Pinnacle Solutions history. A deal worth $8.2 million over 3 years. A deal that I'd negotiated entirely on my own, using relationships I'd built, insights I'd developed, and strategies I'd crafted during all those late nights Evonne thought I was just putting in extra hours to keep up. The irony was beautiful. While she'd been trying to prove I was easily replaceable, I'd been making myself absolutely indispensable. I closed the briefcase, straightened my shoulders, and walked out of that bathroom with renewed purpose. Evonne Thorne was about to learn that underestimating someone who'd fought for everything they'd ever achieved was a very dangerous mistake. But first, I had that phone call to make. Before I tell you about that phone call, the one that changed everything, I need to pause for a moment and talk to you directly. Because if you're watching this video, chances are you've been where I was standing in that bathroom, humiliated, underestimated, and wondering if you're crazy for thinking you deserve better. I want you to know that you're not alone. And I want you to know that your story matters. When I first started thinking about sharing this experience, I wasn't sure if anyone would care. After all, workplace drama happens every day, right? People get passed over for promotions, dealing with difficult supervisors, navigate office politics that sometimes feel more like psychological warfare. It's so common that we've normalized it, accepted it as just part of the price we pay for professional success. But here's the thing I've learned. When we stay silent about these experiences, when we suffer through them alone, we give people like Evonne Thorne permission to keep doing what they're doing. We enable a system that treats talented, hardworking people as disposable, simply because they didn't come from the right background or don't fit someone else's idea of what success should look like. So if this story resonates with you, if you've ever been called easily replaceable, or had someone dismiss your work in front of others, please hit that like button. Not for the algorithm, though I'll admit that helps, but because I want to know I'm not alone in this. I want to know that there are others out there who understand what it feels like to pour your heart into something only to have someone treat it like garbage. And please leave a comment sharing your own experience. I don't care if it's a short sentence or a long story. I read every single comment that comes in. I respond to as many as I can because I want you to know that your voice matters, your experience is valid, and your fight for respect and recognition is worth celebrating. Maybe you're dealing with a supervisor who takes credit for your ideas. Maybe you're the only person of color in your department and constantly having to prove you belong there. Maybe you're a woman in a male-dominated field where every mistake gets magnified while your successes get attributed to luck or someone else's mentorship. Maybe you're like I was, someone from a working-class background trying to navigate a world that operates on unspoken rules you were never taught. Whatever your story is, I want to hear it. Because here's what I've discovered in the months since that conference room incident. There are so many more of us than them. There are so many people out there who are brilliant, dedicated, and capable, but who've been made to feel small by someone who sees their success as a threat to their own position. The comments on my videos have become this incredible community of support. I've heard from teachers who've been bullied by administrators, from nurses who've been mistreated by doctors, from engineers whose innovations have been stolen by their supervisors, from entrepreneurs whose business partners tried to push them out of companies they helped build. The stories are heartbreaking, but they're also inspiring because they show the resilience of the human spirit. One comment that particularly stuck with me came from a woman named Sarah who works in finance. She wrote, "I spent 3 years thinking I was the problem. My manager kept telling me I needed to be more confident, more assertive, but every time I spoke up, I was labeled as difficult or aggressive. It wasn't until I moved to a different department that I realized the problem wasn't me, it was him. Thank you for reminding me that I'm not crazy." That's exactly why I share these stories. Because too often, when we're in toxic situations, we start to internalize the negativity. We begin to believe that maybe we really aren't good enough, maybe we really are replaceable, maybe we really don't deserve better treatment. I spent months after that conference room meeting questioning myself. Was Evonne right? Was my work really subpar? Had I been deluding myself about my abilities and contributions? It took time and distance to realize that her attack on me had nothing to do with the quality of my work and everything to do with her own insecurities and need to maintain control. If you're watching this and you're currently in a situation where someone is trying to make you feel small, I want you to remember something. Their need to diminish you says nothing about your worth and everything about their character. Confident, secure leaders don't build themselves up by tearing others down. They create environments where everyone can succeed. I also want to talk to those of you who might be in positions of power yourselves. Maybe you're watching this and recognizing some uncomfortable truths about your own behavior or the behavior you've witnessed in your workplace. It's never too late to change. It's never too late to be the leader who lifts others up instead of pushing them down. Leadership isn't about making sure everyone knows you're the smartest person in the room. It's about creating space for others to shine, recognizing talent wherever it comes from, and building teams where people feel valued and respected. Some of the best leaders I've worked with since leaving Pinnacle are people who celebrate their team members' successes, who give credit where it's due, and who understand that their job is to make everyone around them better. Before I continue with what happened next, and trust me, you're not going to believe what was in that briefcase and how dramatically things changed, I want to make one more request. If this story is helping you feel less alone in your own struggles, please share it. Send it to that friend who's dealing with a nightmare boss, post it in that group where people are supporting each other through career challenges, or just bookmark it for yourself when you need a reminder that you're stronger than you think. The most powerful thing we can do is break the silence around these experiences. Every time we share our stories, we chip away at the power that bullies and toxic leaders have over us. We create a network of support that reminds people they're not alone, they're not crazy, and they absolutely deserve better. We chip away a toxic leader's story matters. Your voice matters. And if you're still fighting your own battle against someone who's trying to make you feel replaceable, remember this: the most irreplaceable thing about you isn't your skills or your experience. It's your unique perspective, your resilience, and your refusal to let someone else define your worth. Now let me tell you about that phone call and how everything I thought I knew about corporate power dynamics was about to change forever. I walked to my office with purpose, but before I made that call, I needed to understand something that had been nagging at me for months. Sitting at my desk, I pulled out a file I'd been keeping, not officially, just observations I'd noted about patterns in our department. What I saw when I laid it all out made my stomach turn. Evonne Thorne wasn't just a difficult supervisor having a bad day. She was a predator, and I was just her latest victim. Patty Tonfog. Let me tell you about the others. Because their stories matter, and because what happened to me in that conference room was part of a much larger, more disturbing pattern that had been going on for years. There was Layla Stone, a brilliant financial analyst who joined the company 6 months before me. Layla had come from a smaller firm where she'd specialized in risk assessment, and her insights had saved Pinnacle from several potentially disastrous partnerships. But Layla made the mistake of questioning one of Evonne's decisions during a client meeting. Not disrespectfully, just offering an alternative perspective based on market data she'd analyzed. The next week, Layla found herself reassigned to, quote, special projects, which was corporate speak for professional purgatory. Evonne systematically excluded her from important meetings, questioned every recommendation she made, and eventually created such a hostile environment that Layla took a position with a competitor for significantly less money just to escape. Before she left, Layla told me something that still haunts me. I started having panic attacks every Sunday night, dreading Monday morning. No job is worth your mental health. Then there was Ivory Finch, our former director of client relations. Ivory had been with the company for 7 years, longer than Evonne, and had built some of our most valuable long-term partnerships. She was respected by clients, beloved by her team, and consistently exceeded her performance targets. But Ivory had one fatal flaw in Evonne's eyes. She was popular. Too popular. When Ivory was nominated for the industry's Rising Star Award, a prestigious recognition that would have brought significant positive attention to Pinnacle, Evonne launched what she called a comprehensive performance review. She scrutinized every deal Ivory had ever worked on, questioned every client interaction, and somehow found enough minor infractions to build a case for her removal. Ivory was forced to resign just 2 weeks before the awards ceremony, and the nomination was quietly withdrawn. The most heartbreaking case was Mabel Hill, a young partnership coordinator who'd started as an intern and worked her way up through sheer determination and talent. Mabel came from a background similar to mine. First-generation college graduate, student loans, family depending on her success. She was eager, hardworking, and genuinely excited about building a career at Pinnacle. Evonne took that excitement and weaponized it against her. She would assign Mabel impossible deadlines, then publicly humiliate her when she couldn't meet them. She'd promise opportunities for advancement, then give those opportunities to less qualified candidates with better cultural fit. Most cruelly, she'd praise Mabel's work in private, then criticize it harshly in front of others. I watched Mabel transform from a confident, enthusiastic professional into someone who jumped at shadows, second-guessed every decision, and eventually started making the kind of mistakes that come from being in a constant state of anxiety. When Mabel finally broke down crying during a team meeting after Evonne publicly berated her for a minor formatting error, I realized what I was witnessing wasn't just bad management, it was psychological abuse. Mabel left the company 3 months ago. I heard through mutual connections that she'd taken a job at a nonprofit for half the salary, just to get away from the toxic environment Evonne had created. The worst part? Evonne replaced her with her nephew, a recent college graduate with no relevant experience but the right last name and gender. But it wasn't just the women Evonne targeted, though they certainly bore the brunt of her cruelty. She had a special talent for identifying anyone she perceived as a threat and systematically destroying their confidence and credibility. Landercroft, one of our most innovative strategic planners, had developed a revolutionary approach to partnership modeling that increased client satisfaction scores by 40%. Instead of celebrating his innovation, Evonne claimed the methodology as her own creation, presenting it to the board as her brainchild while relegating Lander to implementation duties. When Lander tried to speak up about the misattribution, Evonne suggested he was being territorial and, quote, not a team player. Rogers Gus, our former IT integration specialist, had identified security vulnerabilities in our client data management system that could have exposed sensitive information. When he brought these concerns to Evonne, she dismissed them as technical overthinking and told him to focus on his assigned tasks. 2 months later, when a minor data breach occurred, exactly as Rogers had predicted, Evonne threw him under the bus, claiming he'd failed to properly maintain system security. Rogers was demoted and eventually forced out, while Evonne received praise from the board for her swift response to the security issue. The pattern was always the same: identify talent, exploit it, take credit for successes, assign blame for any problems, and eliminate anyone who might challenge her narrative. She was particularly skilled at making her victims feel isolated, convincing them that they were the problem, that their struggles were due to their own inadequacies rather than her systematic campaign of undermining. What made it even more insidious was how carefully she crafted her public image. To senior leadership, clients, and anyone who mattered in the company hierarchy, Evonne was the epitome of professional success. She spoke at industry conferences about building high-performing teams and developing emerging talent. She mentored junior employees from prestigious universities, taking credit for their successes while maintaining plausible deniability about the failures of others. She was careful never to leave fingerprints on her psychological warfare. There were no screaming matches, no obvious harassment, no clearly documented misconduct. Just a steady drip of criticism, undermining, and gaslighting that slowly eroded her victims' confidence until they either conformed to her will or removed themselves from the equation. I realized, sitting in my office that day, that my humiliation in the conference room wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of months of careful preparation. Evonne had been setting me up for failure, positioning me as incompetent and expendable, so that when she finally moved to eliminate me, it would seem justified. But here's what Evonne didn't understand about people like me, like Layla, like Ivory, like Mabel. We didn't get where we were by being weak. We got there by being resilient, resourceful, and absolutely unwilling to accept defeat. The very qualities that made us threats to her insecure leadership style were the same qualities that would ultimately be her downfall. As I picked up my phone to make that call, I wasn't just fighting for my own career anymore. I was fighting for every person she'd destroyed, every dream she'd crushed, and every future victim she would target if someone didn't finally stand up to her. The $8.2 million contract in my briefcase wasn't just my ticket to professional salvation. It was the weapon that would finally expose Evonne Thorne for what she really was: a fraud, a bully, and a cancer on the organization she claimed to serve. It was time to make that call. Before I dialed that number, I needed a moment to center myself. Not because I was nervous about the call, I'd been preparing for this conversation for months, but because I needed to remember why I was really doing this. It wasn't just about proving Evonne wrong or saving my own career. It was about something much deeper, something that connected to the very core of who I am and what I believe about justice, opportunity, and the responsibility we have to protect others. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a small, framed photograph that I kept tucked away behind some files. It was a picture of my mother, Arisa Quinn, taken at my college graduation 4 years ago. She's standing next to me in her best dress, a navy blue outfit she'd bought specifically for the occasion, probably the most expensive piece of clothing she'd ever owned. Her face is radiant with pride, her arm wrapped around my shoulders as we both smile at the camera. What you can't see in that photograph is the story behind it. You can't see the 18 years of sacrifice that led to that moment, the countless nights my mother worked double shifts so I could focus on my studies instead of worrying about rent money. You can't see the times she went without new clothes, without vacations, without the small luxuries that most people take for granted, all so I could have opportunities she never had. My mother, Elena, had been brilliant in her own right. She'd graduated valedictorian from her high school class with dreams of becoming a teacher, but life had other plans. When she got pregnant with me at 19, my father, a charming but ultimately unreliable man named Tony, made a lot of promises about commitment and shared responsibility. Those promises lasted exactly 8 years before he decided that fatherhood was too much work and disappeared one Tuesday morning while Mom was at her shift at the textile factory. Suddenly, Elena was a single mother with an 8-year-old daughter, no college degree, and bills that seemed to multiply faster than she could pay them. But instead of becoming bitter or giving up on her dreams entirely, she made a different choice. She decided that if she couldn't have the life she'd planned for herself, she would make sure I could have the life she'd dreamed of. "Education is the one thing nobody can take away from you, Mija," she used to tell me while we sat at our kitchen table, her helping me with homework after her long days at work. "Knowledge is power, but more than that, it's freedom. It's the difference between having choices and having no choice at all." She worked 2 jobs, mornings at the textile factory and evenings at Murphy's Diner, for 12 years straight. 12 years without a vacation, without a sick day she couldn't afford to take, without the luxury of calling in tired or unmotivated. She saved every penny she could, putting money aside in an old coffee can she kept hidden in her bedroom closet. By the time I graduated high school, that coffee can contained $3,847, enough to help with my first semester's expenses at the state university. When I received my acceptance letter, my mother cried. Not just regular tears, but the kind of deep, soul-shaking sobs that come from years of deferred dreams and sacrificed hopes finally finding their purpose. "This is it, Arisa," she whispered, holding that letter like it was made of gold. "This is your ticket to a different life." But here's what my mother didn't fully understand at the time, and what I'm only beginning to appreciate now. The life she'd built for us, the sacrifices she'd made, the values she'd instilled in me, those weren't just stepping stones to something better. They were the foundation of everything good about who I became. She taught me that hard work isn't just about personal advancement, it's about honoring the people who invested in your success. She showed me that resilience isn't just about bouncing back from setbacks, it's about protecting the people who depend on you. Most importantly, she demonstrated that true strength comes not from having power over others, but from using whatever power you have to lift others up. That's why what Evonne did in that conference room felt like such a personal violation. It wasn't just an attack on my professional competence. It was an attack on everything my mother had worked for, everything she'd sacrificed for, everything she'd believed about the promise of education and hard work. When Evonne called me easily replaceable, She wasn't just dismissing my contributions to Pinnacle Solutions. She was dismissing 18 years of my mother's faith in the American dream. But the stakes went even deeper than that. The $8.2 million contract sitting in my briefcase wasn't just about money or professional vindication. It represented something that could change the trajectory of countless lives, something that connected directly to the values my mother had instilled in me. 3 months ago, while researching potential partnership opportunities, I'd stumbled across something extraordinary. A consortium of women-owned businesses that were revolutionizing sustainable manufacturing processes. These weren't just any businesses. They were companies founded by women like my mother. Women who'd started with nothing but determination and a vision for something better. The lead company, Harmony Industries, had been founded by a former textile worker named Rosa Delgado, who developed an innovative process for recycling manufacturing waste into high-quality materials. Her technology could reduce industrial waste by up to 60% while creating products that were both environmentally sustainable and cost-effective. But here's the thing about innovation when it comes from unexpected places. It often gets overlooked by traditional investment and partnership channels. Rosa and her consortium had the technology, the market research, and the business plan to revolutionize their industry, but they lacked the connections and credibility that would allow them to scale their operations. That's where I came in. Over the course of 6 months, I'd worked quietly, very quietly, to structure a partnership deal that would connect Rosa's consortium with 3 of Pinnacle's largest manufacturing clients. It was complex, requiring careful coordination between multiple parties, but the potential impact was enormous. The 3-year contract would generate $8.2 million in revenue for Pinnacle, while providing Rosa's consortium with the platform they needed to scale their operations nationally. More importantly, it would create jobs, good, well-paying jobs, for women who looked like my mother, who came from backgrounds like mine, who needed opportunities that recognized their talents rather than their pedigree. I'd structured the deal to include provisions for mentorship programs, skills training, and pathways for advancement that would help these women build careers, not just jobs. It was everything I'd wished had been available to my mother when she was working those double shifts and dreaming of something better. But beyond the professional and social impact, this contract represented something deeply personal to me. It was proof that the values my mother had taught me, hard work, integrity, lifting others up as you climb, weren't just naive idealism. They were practical principles that could create real change in the real world. When Evonne called me easily replaceable in that conference room, she had no idea that she was dismissing not just my work, but a deal that could transform an entire industry and create opportunities for women who'd been overlooked for too long. She had no idea that the subpar analysis she'd mocked represented months of research into companies that traditional consulting firms had ignored because they didn't fit the usual profiles of successful partnerships. As I looked at that photograph of my mother and me on graduation day, I realized that this moment was about more than professional survival or personal vindication. It was about proving that the path we'd taken, the hard path, the path of resilience and determination and refusing to accept limitations, was not just valid but valuable. My mother had worked 18 years to give me opportunities she'd never had. Now I had the chance to use those opportunities to create a better world for women like her. Women who deserved more than just survival. Women who deserved to thrive. It was time to make that call. I placed my mother's photograph back in the drawer and picked up my phone. But before I dialed, I did something that surprised even me. I laughed. Not a bitter laugh or a hysterical one, but a genuine sound of amusement that bubbled up from somewhere deep inside. Here I was, sitting in my office at Pinnacle Solutions, holding a contract worth more money than my mother had made in her entire working life. And Evonne Thorne thought I was easily replaceable. The irony was so perfect it was almost poetic. But as I sat there, phone in hand, I realized something profound was happening inside me. For months, maybe even years, I'd been operating from a place of fear and insecurity, constantly trying to prove myself worthy of a seat at the table that I'd already earned. I'd been playing by rules that were designed to keep people like me in subordinate positions, accepting the premise that my worth was determined by other people's opinions of me. That was ending today. How? The shift wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was more like a quiet revelation, a fundamental reordering of how I saw myself and my situation. For the first time since that humiliating conference room meeting, I wasn't thinking like a victim seeking validation. I was thinking like a strategist planning a campaign. Evonne Thorne had made a critical error in judgment. She'd assumed that because she had positional power over me, because she could humiliate me publicly, because she controlled the traditional levers of corporate authority, she was invulnerable. She'd forgotten the most basic rule of warfare: never underestimate your opponent. I pulled out a legal pad and started writing, not frantically or emotionally, but with the methodical precision of someone who had finally decided to stop playing defense and start playing offense. At the top of the page, I wrote, Strategic Objectives. Objective 1. Secure my position and demonstrate my true value to the company. Objective 2. Expose Evonne's pattern of destructive behavior and protect future targets. Objective 3. Ensure the Rosa Delgado Consortium partnership moves forward, regardless of internal politics. Objective 4. Create lasting change in how Pinnacle Solutions identifies and develops talent. As I wrote, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: clarity. For so long, I'd been reactive, responding to Evonne's attacks and trying to defend myself against her systematic undermining. Now I was taking control of the narrative, defining the terms of engagement, and choosing my battlefield. The phone call I was about to make wasn't just about the contract in my briefcase. It was about fundamentally changing the power dynamic between Evonne Thorne and everyone she'd tried to destroy. She'd built her authority on information asymmetry, on being the gatekeeper between senior leadership and the people doing the actual work. She controlled what they heard, how they interpreted performance data, and which narratives gained traction in executive meetings. That monopoly on information was about to end. I dialed John Hall's direct number, not his assistant's line. John was the CEO who'd hired me 4 years ago, but more importantly, he was someone who'd built his reputation on recognizing talent and making data-driven decisions. He was currently in Boston for a client meeting, but I knew he'd take this call. Arisa, John's voice came through clearly despite the distance. How are you? I have to admit, I was surprised to get a call on my direct line. I'm well, John. Thank you for taking my call. I know you're busy, but I have something time-sensitive I need to discuss with you. Something that could significantly impact Pinnacle's strategic direction and revenue projections for the next 3 years. There was a pause. John Hall was many things, but he wasn't someone who ignored potential opportunities, especially when they came with specific revenue implications. I'm listening. I have been working on a partnership opportunity that I believe represents the largest potential deal in Pinnacle's history. However, there are some internal dynamics that are threatening to derail this opportunity, and I need your direct involvement to ensure we don't lose what could be a transformative contract. How transformative are we talking about? I took a breath, feeling the weight of the moment. $8.2 million over 3 years, with the potential for expansion into additional markets worth substantially more. The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. When John spoke again, his voice had shifted into what I recognized as his serious business mode. Arisa, I need you to be very clear with me. Are you telling me that you've negotiated an $8.2 million partnership deal without going through proper channels? This was the moment of truth. I could backtrack, apologize, try to minimize the situation and hope for damage control. Or I could own my actions completely and force a conversation about results versus process. John, I'm telling you that I've identified and developed a partnership opportunity that exceeds anything we've accomplished in the past 2 years. I've done the market research, structured the deal, and secured preliminary agreements from all parties. The contracts are ready for signature. But I've kept this quiet because I was concerned that internal politics might interfere with what should be a straightforward business decision. Internal politics? You mean Evonne? The directness of his response surprised me. Clearly, John was more aware of the departmental dynamics than I'd realized. I mean that I wanted to present you with a complete, viable opportunity, rather than having my work dismissed or credited to others before you had a chance to evaluate it on its merits. Another pause. When John spoke again, I could hear something that might have been admiration in his voice. You've been working on this independently for how long? 6 months. I've used my own time and resources, worked with clients who specifically requested my involvement, and structured the deal to align with Pinnacle's strategic objectives while creating new revenue streams in sustainable manufacturing partnerships. And you're bringing this to me now because? This was where the strategic thinking I'd developed over the past hour crystallized into action. I could have told him about the conference room humiliation, about Evonne's pattern of destroying talent, about my personal grievances. Instead, I focused on what mattered most to someone in his position. Because this opportunity has a timeline, and I believe Pinnacle deserves leadership that recognizes and develops talent rather than suppressing it. This deal succeeds because of relationships I've built and insights I've developed, but it's being threatened by management practices that prioritize internal control over external results. I see. John's voice was thoughtful now. How quickly can you get back to Boston? I can be on the next flight. Good. I want to see everything. The full deal structure, the client relationships, the revenue projections, all of it. And Arisa? Yes, if what you're telling me is accurate. If you've really structured a deal of this magnitude independently, then we need to have a serious conversation about your role in this company and how we've been utilizing your talents. After I hung up, I sat back in my chair and felt something I hadn't experienced in months: power. Not the kind of power that comes from position or authority, but the power that comes from knowing your worth and being willing to bet everything on it. Evonne Thorne had spent months trying to convince me, and everyone else, that I was easily replaceable. In a few hours, John Hall was going to discover just how irreplaceable I really was. More importantly, he was going to learn that the subpar work Evonne had publicly dismissed was actually the most valuable thing anyone at Pinnacle had accomplished in years. I opened my laptop and started preparing for a presentation that would change everything. Not just for me, but for Rosa Delgado's consortium, for the future victims of Evonne's psychological warfare, and for the kind of company Pinnacle Solutions could become if it chose to value results over politics. The woman who walked out of that conference room in humiliation was gone. In her place was someone who understood that true power comes not from tearing others down, but from building something so valuable that its absence would be impossible to ignore. Evonne Thorne was about to learn the difference. The flight to Boston wasn't until 6 p.m., which gave me 4 hours to do something I should have done months ago. Stop fighting this battle alone. If I was going to present John Hall with the full scope of what was happening at Pinnacle Solutions, I needed more than just my own story. I needed documentation, witnesses, and allies who could corroborate the pattern of destruction that Evonne had been orchestrating. My first call was to Layla Stone. I found her number in my personal contacts. We'd stayed in touch sporadically since she'd left Pinnacle, but I'd been too caught up in my own survival to really understand what she'd been trying to tell me about her experience. Arisa! Layla's voice carried genuine warmth when she answered. This is a surprise. How are you holding up at Pinnacle? Still dealing with the Ice Queen? The Ice Queen? That's what Layla had called Evonne. At the time, I'd thought it was just typical workplace venting. Now I realized it was a warning I should have heeded. Layla, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. When you left Pinnacle, was it really because of the position with Morrison and Associates? Or was it because of Evonne? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Layla spoke again, her voice had lost its casual warmth. Why are you asking? Because she just publicly humiliated me in front of the entire leadership team, called my work pathetic, and told me I was easily replaceable. And I'm starting to realize that what happened to me isn't isolated. Oh, Arisa. Layla's voice was soft with understanding. She's finally coming for you, isn't she? I wondered when she'd decide you were too much of a threat. For the next 20 minutes, Layla told me things I wished I'd known when she was still at the company. How Evonne had systematically excluded her from client meetings where her expertise was needed. How she'd been reassigned to special projects that were designed to waste her time and make her look unproductive. How Evonne had spread subtle rumors about her work ethic and reliability that eventually reached other departments. The worst part, Layla said, was how she made me doubt myself. I started wondering if maybe I really wasn't as good as I thought, if maybe I really was being oversensitive or difficult. It wasn't until I got to Morrison and Associates and they treated me like a valued professional that I realized how toxic the environment at Pinnacle had become. Layla, I need to ask you something difficult. Would you be willing to document what happened to you? Write it down. Provide specifics about meetings, emails, incidents. I think I'm going to have the opportunity to expose what she's been doing, but I need evidence. Another pause. Are you sure you want to go down this road? Evonne has a lot of power, and she's very good at protecting herself. I'm sure, but more than that, I think I have something she doesn't know about, something that changes the entire dynamic. What kind of something? I told her about the $8.2 million contract, about my meeting with John Hall, about the Rosa Delgado consortium. As I spoke, I could hear Layla's excitement building. Arisa, this is incredible. You're telling me that while she was trying to undermine you, you were putting together the biggest deal in the company's history? That's exactly what I'm telling you. And I think it's time everyone knew the truth about what kind of leadership we've been tolerating. Send me your email address. I'll have documentation to you within 2 hours. My next call was to Mabel Hill. I'd been hesitant to reach out to her because I knew how devastating her experience at Pinnacle had been, but I also knew that her story was crucial to establishing the pattern of Evonne's behavior. Mabel answered on the first ring, and when I explained why I was calling, she was quiet for a long moment. I don't know if I can do this, Arisa. What happened there? It really messed with my head. I'm just starting to feel confident again at my new job. I understand, and I won't push you if you're not ready. But Mabel, what she did to you was wrong. It was calculated, systematic psychological abuse, and you deserve better. More importantly, she's still doing it to other people. What do you mean? I told her about the conference room incident, about the pattern I'd identified, about the other victims I'd been researching. As I spoke, I could hear something changing in Mabel's voice. She's still doing this to people? She is. And I think we have a chance to stop her, but only if people are willing to tell their stories. What kind of chance? When I explained about the contract and John Hall's interest in hearing the full story, Mabel's response surprised me. You know what? Yes, I'll help. Not just for me, but for whoever comes after me. No one should have to go through what I went through. My third call was the most important one, and also the most nerve-wracking. I dialed the number for Harmony Industries and asked to speak with Rosa Delgado. Ms. Quinn. Rosa's voice carried the slight accent that reminded me of my mother's friend Maria, who'd worked alongside her at the textile factory. I was hoping to hear from you soon. My partners and I have been very excited about the partnership proposal you outlined. Rosa, I'm calling because there may be some complications on our end that I need to make you aware of. There are some internal politics at Pinnacle that could potentially impact our timeline. What kind of complications? I chose my words carefully. There are people in leadership positions who may not immediately see the value in what you and your consortium have built. They may need some convincing that partnerships with women-owned businesses are worth their attention. Rosa was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, there was steel in her voice. Miss Quinn, let me tell you something. I've been dealing with people who underestimate women-owned businesses for 15 years. I've had investors tell me that my technology was interesting but not scalable. I've had potential partners suggest that I should find a male co-founder to give my company more credibility. I've had consultants recommend that I step back and let someone else be the face of my company. She paused, and I could hear the passion building in her voice. Do you know what all of those people have in common? They're all watching my company succeed from the sidelines while their more credible investments fail. I didn't build Harmony Industries to make other people comfortable. I built it to prove that innovation comes from unexpected places, and that women like us don't need anyone's permission to succeed. That's exactly why I wanted to work with you, I said, and that's why I'm going to make sure this partnership happens, regardless of what internal obstacles I have to overcome. What do you need from me? I need you to be prepared to present your technology and business model directly to our CEO. Not through intermediaries, not through traditional channels, but face-to-face, so he can see exactly what kind of opportunity we're talking about. When? Tomorrow. Can you be in Boston by tomorrow afternoon? Ms. Quinn, I've been ready for this conversation my entire life. We'll be there. After I hung up with Rosa, I called Landercroft. He was still at Pinnacle, still dealing with Evonne's management style, and I knew he'd been frustrated for months about the misattribution of his partnership modeling innovation. "Arisa, I heard about what happened in the leadership meeting this morning. I'm sorry you had to go through that." Word traveled fast in corporate environments. "Lander, can you meet me for coffee before I leave for the airport? There's something I want to discuss with you." We met at the Starbucks across from the Pinnacle building. Lander looked tired, wearing the same expression of frustrated resignation I'd seen on so many faces over the past few months. "She's systematically destroying everyone who shows any independent thinking," he said after I'd explained my conversation with John Hall. "I've been documenting everything since she took credit for my methodology, but I wasn't sure what to do with it." "What kind of documentation?" Lander pulled out his phone and showed me a folder titled Professional Development Notes. Inside were screenshots of emails, meeting notes, documentation of ideas he'd presented, and their subsequent misattribution, records of projects he'd been excluded from after raising questions. I've been keeping track because I knew eventually there would be a reckoning. I just didn't think it would come this soon. Are you willing to share this with John Hall? If it means stopping her from doing this to other people, absolutely. By 4 p.m., I had commitments from 4 former and current Pinnacle employees to provide documentation and testimony about Evonne's management practices. Layla had already sent me a detailed timeline of her experiences, complete with email screenshots and meeting notes. Mabel was working on a written statement about the psychological impact of Evonne's treatment. Lander had compiled his evidence into a comprehensive presentation. Even Rogers Gus, the former IT specialist, had responded to my LinkedIn message with an offer to provide documentation about how Evonne had scapegoated him for the security issues he'd tried to prevent. But the most powerful element of my growing coalition wasn't the documentation. It was Rosa Delgado and her consortium. They represented something that went beyond corporate politics or workplace drama. They represented the future, innovation, and the kind of partnerships that could transform not just Pinnacle Solutions, but the entire industry. As I sat in the airport terminal, waiting for my flight to Boston, I reviewed the materials my allies had provided. Each story was damning on its own, but together they painted a picture of systematic abuse that would be impossible for any rational leader to ignore. More importantly, they demonstrated something that Evonne had never understood. Real leadership isn't about tearing others down to build yourself up. It's about creating environments where everyone can succeed, where innovation is celebrated regardless of its source, and where talent is developed rather than destroyed. I was no longer fighting this battle as an isolated individual trying to defend herself against a powerful supervisor. I was leading a coalition of talented professionals who'd been undervalued and underutilized, and we were armed with evidence, allies, and a $8.2 million contract that proved our collective worth. Evonne Thorne had called me easily replaceable. Tomorrow, John Hall was going to discover just how irreplaceable all of us really were. The flight to Boston gave me 2 uninterrupted hours to transform a collection of grievances and evidence into a comprehensive strategic presentation that would fundamentally reshape Pinnacle Solutions' leadership structure. This wasn't going to be a simple complaint session or a desperate plea for help. This was going to be a business case for organizational change, backed by concrete evidence and a transformative revenue opportunity. I opened my laptop and created a new presentation file titled Pinnacle Solutions, Strategic Assessment and Growth Opportunity. The title was deliberately corporate and neutral, nothing that would immediately signal the bombshell I was about to drop. I'd learned over the years that successful corporate communications require careful framing, and I needed John Hall to see this as a business discussion, rather than interpersonal drama. The presentation structure I developed was methodical and building toward inevitable conclusions. Slide 1, Executive Summary. Identification of $8.2 million partnership opportunity. Analysis of current organizational challenges affecting growth. Recommendations for leadership development and talent optimization. Projected impact on company revenue and market positioning. Slides 2 to 5. Partnership Opportunity Overview. Here I detailed the Rosa Delgado Consortium deal with meticulous precision. Market analysis showing the growing demand for sustainable manufacturing solutions. Financial projections demonstrating not just the immediate $8.2 million revenue, but the potential for expansion into additional markets worth $25 million over 5 years. Client testimonials from preliminary discussions. Risk assessment and mitigation strategies. But the real strategic genius of this section was how I positioned myself within the opportunity. I didn't just present the deal. I demonstrated that the relationships, insights, and negotiation success were directly tied to my specific expertise and approach. Without explicitly saying it, I made it clear that Pinnacle couldn't simply reassign this contract to someone else. The clients had specifically requested to work with me, the terms had been negotiated based on my understanding of their needs, and the ongoing success would require my continued involvement. Slides 6 to 10, Organizational Assessment. This was where the strategy became more complex. I couldn't simply attack Evonne directly. That would make me look petty and vindictive. Instead, I presented what I called a talent retention and development analysis that examined patterns in employee turnover, performance metrics, and leadership effectiveness. I used data visualization to show disturbing trends in our department: unusually high turnover among high-performing employees, decreased innovation metrics over the past 18 months, and declining client satisfaction scores in accounts managed by certain supervisors. I included anonymous employee feedback from exit interviews that mentioned micromanagement, hostile work environment, and lack of growth opportunities. The brilliance of this approach was that I let the data tell the story. John Hall could draw his own conclusions about why talented employees were leaving, why innovation was declining, and why client relationships were suffering in specific areas of the organization. Slides 11 to 15. Case Studies in Leadership Impact. Here I presented 3 detailed case studies without naming names. Case Study A was Layla Stone's experience, a high-performing financial analyst whose departure resulted in the loss of 2 major client relationships and whose replacement took 6 months to achieve basic competency. Case Study B was Ivory Finch's situation, a beloved client relations director whose forced resignation led to 3 clients expressing concerns about account management continuity. Case Study C was Mabel Hill, a promising coordinator whose deteriorating performance and eventual departure required extensive recruitment and training costs to replace. Each case study included financial impact assessments. Layla's departure cost approximately $180,000 in lost revenue and replacement training. Ivory's resignation resulted in $340,000 in client relationship management costs and 1 small account departure. Mabel's situation required $65,000 in recruitment, training, and productivity gap expenses. The message was clear. Poor leadership practices weren't just damaging morale, they were directly impacting the bottom line. Slides 16 to 20, Innovation and Partnership Development Analysis. This section focused on Landercroft's partnership modeling innovation and how it had been mismanaged. I presented his original methodology, the results it had achieved, and the potential for expansion if properly developed and attributed. I also included analysis of other innovative ideas that had emerged from our department but never received proper support or development. The strategic insight here was demonstrating that Pinnacle was sitting on a gold mine of innovative thinking and strategic capabilities, but that current management practices were preventing the company from fully leveraging these assets. Slides 21 to 25, Recommendations and Implementation Strategy. This was where I transitioned from analysis to action. I presented a comprehensive plan for organizational restructuring that would optimize talent development, improve innovation processes, and create accountability measures for leadership effectiveness. Key recommendations included implementation of 360-degree feedback systems for all leadership positions, creation of innovation incubators that would allow employees to develop ideas independently, establishment of client relationship ownership that would prevent arbitrary reassignment of accounts, development of mentorship programs that focused on talent development rather than control, regular organizational climate assessments to identify and address toxic management practices. I also included a detailed timeline for implementing these changes and projected ROI based on improved retention, increased innovation, and enhanced client relationships. But the most crucial element of my strategic planning wasn't the presentation itself. It was the coordination of multiple moving parts that would support and amplify my message. While working on the slides, I was simultaneously orchestrating a complex communication strategy with my allies. Rosa Delgado was preparing her own presentation about the consortium's technology and market opportunity. She would arrive in Boston tomorrow morning with technical specifications, client testimonials, and financial projections that would demonstrate the concrete value of the partnership I'd negotiated. Layla Stone was compiling her documentation into a formal report that would be submitted to John Hall's assistant, timed to arrive just before our meeting. Her analysis of the financial impact of toxic leadership practices would provide additional credibility to my organizational assessment. Landercroft was preparing a presentation about his partnership modeling innovation that would demonstrate both the value of his work and the organizational dysfunction that had prevented it from being properly utilized. He would request a separate meeting with John Hall to discuss professional development opportunities that would give him a chance to present his case independently. The timing was critical. I couldn't have all of these conversations happening simultaneously that would look coordinated and potentially manipulative. Instead, I choreographed a sequence of interactions that would build a compelling narrative over several days. First, my presentation about the $8.2 million opportunity would establish my value and credibility. Then Rosa's presentation would demonstrate the concrete reality of the deal and the innovation potential we were capturing. Finally, the documentation from former employees and current staff would provide context for why these opportunities had been developed outside normal channels. But I also had to prepare for Evonne's inevitable counterattack. She was intelligent, politically savvy, and would definitely not accept this challenge to her authority without fighting back. I developed 3 different contingency strategies based on how she might respond. Contingency Plan A: character assassination. If Evonne tried to discredit me personally, I had documentation of my performance reviews, client feedback, and revenue generation that would refute any claims about my competence or professionalism. I also had witnesses who could testify to my work ethic and achievements. Contingency Plan B: procedural objections. If Evonne claimed I'd violated company policy by negotiating deals independently, I had research showing that similar initiatives had been encouraged and rewarded in other departments. I also had documentation showing that my attempts to work through normal channels had been consistently blocked or dismissed. Contingency Plan C: damage control. If Evonne tried to minimize the evidence against her or claim that the departed employees were simply poor cultural fits, I had metrics and comparative data that would demonstrate the unusual patterns in our department versus other areas of the company. The most sophisticated element of my planning was the psychological strategy. I understood that John Hall was a numbers-driven leader who valued results above personalities. I needed to present this entire situation as a business optimization opportunity rather than a personal conflict. Every element of my presentation focused on measurable impacts, concrete opportunities, and strategic advantages for Pinnacle Solutions. I also recognize that successful organizational change requires not just exposing problems, but providing solutions. I couldn't simply tear down Evonne's leadership without demonstrating that I had viable alternatives and implementation strategies. The presentation needed to position me not as a victim seeking justice, but as a strategic thinker offering organizational improvement. As the plane descended into Boston, I reviewed my materials one final time. 25 slides that told a comprehensive story about untapped potential, systemic dysfunction, and transformative opportunity. Supporting documentation from multiple sources that corroborated every major claim, a coalition of allies ready to provide independent testimony, and most importantly, an $8.2 million contract that proved the value of everything I was proposing. Tomorrow's meeting would determine not just my future at Pinnacle Solutions, but the future of everyone who'd been damaged by Evonne's leadership style. More significantly, it would determine whether companies like Rosa Delgado's consortium would have access to the partnerships and opportunities they needed to scale their innovations. I was no longer just fighting for my career. I was fighting for a vision of what corporate leadership could look like when it focused on developing talent rather than destroying it. Evonne Thorne had called me easily replaceable. In less than 18 hours, John Hall was going to discover that the opposite was true, that she was the one whose leadership style was obsolete, destructive, and ultimately replaceable. The strategy was set. Now it was time to execute. John Hall's office occupied the entire corner of the 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower in downtown Boston. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the harbor, but as I sat across from his mahogany desk at 9 a.m. sharp, I was focused entirely on the man who would determine the trajectory of multiple lives over the next hour. John looked exactly as I remembered: sharp gray suit, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of focused intensity that had built Pinnacle Solutions from a small consulting firm into a regional powerhouse. But there was something different in his expression as I set up my laptop for the presentation. He looked genuinely curious, almost hungry for whatever I was about to reveal. "Before we begin," he said, leaning back in his chair, "I want you to know that I made some calls after our conversation yesterday. I spoke with 3 of your clients directly: Patterson Industries, Meridian Tech, and Cascade Manufacturing. Do you know what they all told me?" My stomach tightened. This wasn't how I'd planned to start the meeting. "I'm not sure, John. They all told me that you're the reason they stay with Pinnacle. Patterson's CFO specifically said that if anything happened to you, they'd seriously consider taking their business elsewhere." He paused, studying my reaction. "That's either impressive client relationship management, or there's something going on in your department that I haven't been aware of." The opening I hadn't expected, but one I could definitely use. "John, I think after you see what I have to present, you'll understand exactly why those clients feel that way, and why their loyalty represents both an opportunity and a risk for Pinnacle." I launched into the presentation, starting with the Rosa Delgado Consortium Partnership. As I walked through the financial projections, market analysis, and growth potential, I watched John's expression shift from polite attention to genuine engagement. When I reached the slide showing the $8.2 million 3-year revenue projection with expansion potential to $25 million, he held up his hand. "Stop right there. You're telling me you've negotiated this deal entirely on your own?" "I've structured the preliminary agreements and secured commitments from all parties, yes. But John, I want to be clear about something. This isn't about me working outside normal channels because I wanted to. It's about working outside normal channels because I had to." "Explain that." This was the moment I'd been preparing for. The clients specifically requested to work with me because of relationships I'd built over the past 4 years. The innovative companies in Rosa's consortium had been overlooked by traditional partnership channels because they don't fit conventional profiles. And frankly, I wasn't confident that presenting this opportunity through our usual department processes would result in the kind of attention and resources it deserved. John's eyebrows raised slightly. "That's a significant criticism of our internal processes." "It's an observation based on patterns I've documented over the past 18 months. I clicked to the organizational assessment slides. Which brings me to the second part of what I need to share with you. As I presented the data on employee turnover, declining innovation metrics, and client satisfaction issues, I watched John's expression grow increasingly serious. When I reached the slide showing the financial impact of losing key talent, he interrupted again. "These numbers, you're saying we've lost over $500,000 in the past year just from turnover and replacement costs in your department? That's a conservative estimate. It doesn't include the opportunity costs of innovation we failed to develop, or partnerships we've missed because of talent mismanagement." I was just transitioning to the case studies when John's assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Hall, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Evonne Thorne is here. She says it's urgent and relates to the meeting you're currently having." My heart rate spiked. This wasn't part of the plan. Evonne somehow knew about my meeting with John, and she was here to do damage control. John looked at me, then back at his assistant. "Give us 5 more minutes, then send her in." "John," I said quickly, "before she arrives, I need you to know that there's more to this story, and I have supporting documentation from multiple sources. Whatever she's going to tell you, I can provide evidence that contradicts it." "What kind of evidence?" I pulled out my folder containing Layla's documentation, Lander's innovation analysis, and the other materials my allies had provided. Employee testimonials, performance data, financial impact assessments, and recorded evidence of management practices that are directly damaging Pinnacle's profitability and reputation. John's expression hardened. "Recorded evidence?" Before I could respond, Evonne walked into the office. She looked immaculate as always. Perfectly styled, designer suit, the kind of polished confidence that had intimidated me for years. But today, I noticed something I'd never seen before. A slight tension around her eyes that suggested she wasn't as composed as she appeared. "John," Evonne said smoothly, "I'm glad I caught you before this meeting went any further. I need to inform you about some serious concerns regarding Arisa's recent behavior and judgment." "Evonne, please sit down," John said evenly. Arisa was just presenting a partnership opportunity that could be very significant for the company. "Yes, I'm aware of what she claims to have negotiated," Evonne replied, taking the chair next to mine. "And that's exactly what I need to discuss with you. Arisa has been working on unauthorized projects, making commitments to clients without proper oversight, and frankly, showing concerning patterns of insubordination. This was my first real test. I could feel the old patterns of intimidation and self-doubt trying to reassert themselves. But instead of shrinking back, I leaned forward. "Evonne, can you be specific about which commitments you're referring to? Because I have documentation of every client interaction, every negotiation milestone, and every agreement I've made. The Rosa Delgado situation, for one. You've been meeting with potential partners without department approval, making promises about resources and timelines that you have no authority to guarantee." John held up his hand. "Let me understand this. Arisa, you've been developing this partnership independently. Evonne, you're saying she didn't have authorization for these activities. What's our standard process for partnership development?" This was where my preparation paid off. "John, according to company policy, senior partnership managers are encouraged to identify and develop new opportunities using their professional judgment. I've worked within those guidelines while keeping detailed records of all activities." "But she's been secretive about her work," Evonne interjected, refusing to provide updates in department meetings, declining to collaborate with team members, essentially operating as a freelancer rather than a team player. "I've been discreet about work in progress," I corrected, "because premature disclosure of sensitive negotiations can damage deal prospects, which is standard practice that I learned from watching how successful partnerships are developed." John was quiet for a moment, then turned to his computer. "I'm looking at the quarterly reports from your department, Evonne. Arisa's individual performance metrics are substantially higher than the department average. Her client satisfaction scores are the highest in the company, and her revenue generation has increased every quarter for the past 2 years." I saw Evonne's jaw tighten slightly. "Performance metrics don't tell the whole story, John. There are qualitative factors, team collaboration, adherence to processes, cultural fit, that are equally important." This was my opening. "Speaking of cultural fit, I think it's relevant that we've had unusual turnover in our department over the past 18 months, and that several departing employees have cited management practices as factors in their decision to leave." "What kind of management practices?" John asked. Before Evonne could respond, there was another knock on the door. John's assistant entered with a concerned expression. "Mr. Hall, there's a Rosa Delgado here who says she has a 10 a.m. appointment to discuss a partnership opportunity with Arisa Quinn. She's brought several colleagues and seems very professional, but I don't have this meeting on your calendar." This was either a disaster or perfect timing. I'd told Rosa to be prepared to present, but I hadn't confirmed the exact timing. Now she was here during the confrontation with Evonne. "John," I said quickly, "this is Rosa Delgado from Harmony Industries. She's the primary partner in the $8.2 million consortium deal. I asked her to be available to present directly to you because the opportunity has time-sensitive elements." John looked between Evonne and me, clearly processing the implications. "Bring them up," he told his assistant. "John," Evonne said urgently, "I think we should resolve the internal questions about authorization and processes before involving external parties." "Actually," John replied, "I think the best way to evaluate this situation is to hear directly from the clients Arisa claims to have secured. If this deal is as significant as she's presented, and if these relationships are as strong as she suggests, that will inform how we handle the process questions." 5 minutes later, Rosa Delgado walked into John Hall's office with 2 of her consortium partners. Rosa was exactly as I'd imagined from our phone conversations. Early 50s, silver-streaked black hair, the kind of confident bearing that comes from building something meaningful from nothing. Her partners, Dr. Sarah Chen from Sustainable Solutions, Inc., and Maria Rodriguez from Eco Manufacturing Partners, brought technical expertise and business acumen that was immediately evident. "Mr. Hall," Rosa said, extending her hand, "thank you for making time to meet with us. Arisa has told us wonderful things about Pinnacle's commitment to innovative partnerships." As Rosa began presenting the technical specifications of their sustainable manufacturing processes, I watched Evonne's expression change, from confident to concerned to almost panicked. The deal was real, substantial, and clearly beyond anything our department had developed recently. But more than that, Rosa's presentation style and the questions she asked demonstrated exactly the kind of sophisticated, forward-thinking partnership approach that John valued. This wasn't some desperate small business looking for help. This was a consortium of innovative companies offering Pinnacle access to emerging markets and cutting-edge technologies. When Rosa finished her 20-minute presentation, John asked the question I'd been hoping for. "This partnership structure that Arisa developed, how specifically did she identify your consortium and understand your needs well enough to create this proposal?" "Mr. Hall," Rosa replied, "Arisa spent months researching our industry, attending conferences where we were presenting, and taking the time to understand not just our business model but our values and long-term vision. Most consulting firms approach us with generic partnership templates. Arisa created a custom structure that addresses our specific challenges while creating genuine value for both organizations." John turned to me. "When did this research and relationship development begin?" "About 8 months ago," I replied. "I identified sustainable manufacturing as an emerging market opportunity and began building expertise in the sector." "And during this 8-month period," John asked, looking directly at Evonne, "what kind of support and resources did Arisa receive from her immediate supervisor?" The question hung in the air like a time bomb waiting to explode. Evonne's careful composure finally cracked. "John, I think you're being misled about the significance of this opportunity and Arisa's role in developing it. This kind of independent operation sets a concerning precedent for department management." But Rosa Delgado had heard enough. "I'm sorry, but I need to clarify something. Are you suggesting that Arisa's work in developing this partnership was somehow inappropriate or unauthorized?" The room fell silent. Rosa looked around at the three of us, clearly sensing the tension she'd walked into. "Because if that's the case," Rosa continued, "I need to tell you that Arisa's professionalism, expertise, and commitment to understanding our needs has been exceptional. If Pinnacle Solutions doesn't value the kind of innovative thinking and relationship building she's demonstrated, then perhaps we need to reconsider whether this is the right partnership for our consortium." The threat was implicit but unmistakable. Rosa Delgado was prepared to walk away from an $8.2 million deal if it meant working with people who didn't appreciate Arisa's contributions. John Hall looked at Evonne, then at me, then at Rosa and her partners. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who just made a decision that would change everything. "I think we need to have a much more comprehensive conversation about how Pinnacle Solutions identifies, develops, and supports innovative partnership opportunities. And I think we need to have it today." John Hall dismissed Rosa and her partners with assurances that Pinnacle would be in touch within 24 hours regarding next steps. As they left, Rosa caught my eye and gave me a small nod that conveyed both confidence and support. The door closed behind them, leaving me alone with John and Evonne in what was about to become the most consequential hour of my professional life. "Evonne," John said, settling back into his chair, "I want to understand exactly what concerns you have about Arisa's work on this partnership, because what I'd just witnessed was a presentation from serious business leaders offering us the largest single deal in our company's history." Evonne had regained some of her composure during Rosa's presentation, but I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. She was a master of corporate politics, and she knew this was the moment where she either regained control of the narrative or lost everything. "John, I appreciate that the numbers look impressive," she began, her voice carrying that tone of reasonable concern she'd perfected over the years. "But there are serious process violations and judgment issues that we can't ignore, just because the outcome appears favorable." She pulled out her own folder. She'd come prepared for this battle. Over the past 8 months, Arisa has consistently refused to provide updates on her activities during department meetings. She's declined collaboration opportunities with team members who could have strengthened her proposals. She's made commitments to external parties without seeking approval from appropriate leadership levels. John nodded thoughtfully. "Those are process concerns. What about the substance of her work? That's exactly my point, Evonne replied, leaning forward with the intensity of someone making a crucial argument. We can't properly evaluate the substance because she's been operating in isolation. For all we know, there are legal issues, financial risks, or strategic conflicts that haven't been properly vetted. This was the moment I'd been preparing for throughout the flight, through all those late nights of documentation and strategy development. Everything I'd learned about corporate dynamics, everything I'd observed about power structures, everything my mother had taught me about standing up for what's right, it all converged into this single moment of truth. But instead of responding immediately, I did something that surprised everyone in the room, including myself. I smiled. Not a bitter smile or a confrontational one, but the kind of calm, confident expression that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're capable of achieving. Evonne, I said quietly, you're absolutely right about one thing. I have been operating differently over the past 8 months, and I think it's time we discussed why. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the folder containing all the documentation my allies had provided. But before opening it, I looked directly at John. John, before I share what's in this folder, I want to ask you a question. What do you think Pinnacle's most valuable asset is? He considered for a moment. Our client relationships and the expertise of our team. Exactly. And what happens to those assets when talented team members leave the company? We lose institutional knowledge, client relationships suffer, and we incur replacement costs. I nodded and opened my folder. Then I think you need to see this. I pulled out Layla Stone's detailed documentation first. This is a comprehensive analysis prepared by Layla Stone, our former financial risk specialist. She documented 18 months of systematic exclusion from meetings where her expertise was needed, reassignment to meaningless projects designed to waste her time, and eventually, a hostile work environment that forced her to accept a position with a competitor for significantly less money. John took the document and began reading. As his eyes moved down the page, I watched his expression grow increasingly serious. Layla's departure cost us approximately $180,000 in lost revenue and replacement costs, I continued. But more importantly, it cost us the expertise that could have prevented the Morrison account complications we faced 6 months ago. Evonne shifted uncomfortably. Layla chose to leave. We offered her opportunities to improve her performance. Did you offer her opportunities, I asked? Or did you create conditions that made it impossible for her to succeed? I pulled out the second document. This is from Mabel Hill, our former partnership coordinator. She's documented the psychological impact of management practices that included impossible deadlines, public humiliation for minor errors, and promises of advancement that were consistently broken. John read silently for several minutes. When he looked up, his expression had changed completely. Mabel was hospitalized for anxiety-related symptoms, I said quietly. She's now working for a nonprofit at half her former salary because she was so traumatized by her experience here that she couldn't consider another corporate position. That's an unfortunate situation, Evonne said, but her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. But individuals respond differently to performance pressure. Some people aren't suited for high-demand environments. Or, I replied, pulling out Landercroft's presentation, some people are systematically undermined when they demonstrate capabilities that threaten someone else's position. I handed John the documentation of Lander's partnership modeling innovation and its subsequent misattribution. Lander developed a methodology that increased client satisfaction by 40%. Instead of receiving recognition for this innovation, he watched as credit for his work was claimed by others while he was relegated to implementation duties. As John reviewed Lander's materials, I saw something shift in his demeanor. He wasn't just reading employee complaints anymore. He was seeing a pattern of talent mismanagement that had direct financial implications for the company. John, I said, I want to show you something else. I opened my laptop and pulled up a spreadsheet I'd created during the flight. This is a correlation analysis between departmental turnover rates and revenue performance over the past 2 years. The data visualization was stark and undeniable. Our department had the highest turnover rate in the company, despite having some of the most talented employees. Revenue per employee had declined by 23%, even as individual performers like myself had increased their productivity. Now let me show you the opportunity cost analysis, I continued, clicking to the next slide. Based on the innovations and partnerships that left the company with departing employees, I calculate that we've lost approximately $2.3 million in potential revenue over the past 18 months. John studied the screen intently. How did you calculate this figure? Layla's risk assessment expertise could have prevented the Morrison complications that cost us $340,000. Ivory Finch's client relationships would have secured the Cascade expansion worth $480,000. Lander's methodology, properly developed, could have generated at least $600,000 in new partnerships, and that's just what I can document directly. Evonne had been unusually quiet during this presentation, and I could see her calculating her next move. When she spoke, her voice carried a note of desperation disguised as authority. John, I think we're losing sight of the fundamental issue here. Arisa is presenting cherry-picked data to support a narrative that justifies her own inappropriate behavior. The reality is that managing high-performing teams requires making difficult decisions about personnel and priorities. This was the moment I'd been building toward throughout this entire confrontation. Everything I'd learned about corporate power dynamics, everything I'd observed about Evonne's methods, everything I'd prepared for this exact situation, it all came down to what I said next. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the final document in my folder. It was a single sheet of paper with a timeline printed on it. Evonne, I said, my voice completely calm. This is a timeline of every interaction you and I have had over the past 8 months. Every meeting, every email, every conversation. I handed the document to John while keeping my eyes fixed on Evonne. What you'll notice is that beginning in March, there's a clear pattern of escalating criticism, project reassignments, and systematic exclusion from opportunities, all corresponding exactly with my work on the Rosa Delgado partnership. John examined the timeline while I continued. You see, I didn't just document my own experience. I also researched the experiences of everyone else who'd been targeted by similar treatment. And what I discovered is that the pattern is always the same. Identify talent, exploit it for as long as it's useful, then eliminate it when it becomes a threat. That's a serious accusation, John said quietly. It's a documented pattern, I replied. But John, I want to be very clear about something. I'm not here to destroy anyone's career or seek personal revenge. I'm here because I believe Pinnacle Solutions can be better than this. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recording app. Which brings me to the most important piece of evidence I have to share. Evonne's face went pale. She knew what was coming. 3 days ago, I had a conversation with Evonne about my future at this company. Since I was concerned about potential miscommunication, I recorded our discussion. John looked between us, clearly sensing the significance of what was about to be revealed. I pressed play, and Evonne's voice filled the room with crystal clarity. Arisa, let's be honest about your situation here. You've been coasting on early successes, but your recent work has been disappointing. The Rosa Delgado thing you keep talking about? It's a fantasy. No legitimate company is going to partner with us based on relationships you think you've built. John's eyebrows raised as the recording continued. The truth is, you're easily replaceable. There are dozens of MBAs who could do your job better, and they wouldn't come with the attitude problems you've developed. If I were you, I'd start looking for opportunities elsewhere before I'm forced to document performance issues that would make finding another position much more difficult. The recording ended and the office fell silent. John stared at the phone, then at Evonne, then at me. When was this conversation recorded? He asked. 3 days ago, in Evonne's office, immediately following our quarterly department meeting. The quarterly meeting where Evonne praised your work and recommended you for the senior partnership development position? The same meeting, I confirmed. John turned to Evonne, and for the first time since I'd known him, I saw genuine anger in his expression. Evonne, help me understand this. 3 days ago, you're telling Arisa that her work is fantasy, and that she's easily replaceable. Today, she's presenting an $8.2 million partnership deal with sophisticated clients who specifically requested to work with her. Which assessment is accurate? Evonne's carefully constructed facade finally cracked completely. John, you're taking this out of context. That conversation was about helping Arisa understand realistic expectations and performance standards. By telling her that her work was fantasy and threatening to sabotage her career prospects? I was providing honest feedback about areas for improvement. I couldn't stay silent anymore. Evonne, was it honest feedback when you told the leadership team yesterday that my quarterly report was pathetic? When you said I was clearly not ready for the big leagues? When you tore up my proposal in front of everyone and told them I was nothing special? John's expression darkened further. What exactly happened in yesterday's leadership meeting? For the next 10 minutes, I described the conference room humiliation in detail. As I spoke, I watched John's face cycle through disbelief, anger, and what looked like disgust. When I finished, he turned to Evonne. Is Arisa's account of yesterday's meeting accurate? Evonne looked trapped. She couldn't deny what had happened in front of 12 witnesses, but she also couldn't justify it in light of everything else that had been revealed. John, managing high-performing teams sometimes requires difficult conversations about standards and expectations. Difficult conversations, John repeated slowly. Is that what you call publicly humiliating an employee who is actually developing the largest partnership deal in our company's history? The silence stretched for what felt like hours. Finally, John stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the Boston skyline. When he turned back to face us, his expression was that of a CEO who had just realized that a fundamental problem in his organization needed immediate and decisive action. Evonne, he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Effective immediately, you're relieved of your supervisory responsibilities, pending a comprehensive investigation into the management practices in your department. Evonne's face went white. John, I think you're making a serious mistake based on one-sided accusations and misinterpreted conversations. I'm making a decision based on documented evidence of talent mismanagement that has cost this company millions of dollars and destroyed the careers of talented professionals. He turned to me. Arisa, I want you to know that what you've presented today represents exactly the kind of innovative thinking and strategic development that Pinnacle needs to succeed. The Rosa Delgado partnership will move forward with full company support, and you'll have whatever resources you need to ensure its success. As Evonne gathered her materials and walked toward the door, John's voice stopped her. Evonne, I want you to understand something. Arisa came here today with an $8.2 million opportunity and evidence of systematic talent destruction in our organization. She could have taken this deal to any of our competitors and probably doubled her salary in the process. Instead, she chose to fight for this company and for the people you've been damaging. He paused, looking directly at her. That's not the behavior of someone who's easily replaceable. That's the behavior of someone who understands what leadership actually means. As the door closed behind Evonne, I felt something I hadn't experienced since that humiliating conference room meeting, complete vindication. But more than that, I felt the profound satisfaction of knowing that my mother's lessons about hard work, integrity, and standing up for what's right had just transformed not only my own life, but the lives of everyone who'd been damaged by a system that prioritized power over people. John Hall looked at me with an expression of genuine respect. Arisa, I think we need to discuss your new role in this organization. Because after what I've seen today, it's clear that your talents have been dramatically underutilized. The woman who'd walked out of that conference room in humiliation was gone forever. In her place was someone who understood that true power comes not from tearing others down, but from building something so valuable that its absence would be impossible to ignore. And Evonne Thorne? She was about to learn what easily replaceable really meant. 6 months later, I'm sitting in what used to be Evonne Thorne's office, now mine, as Pinnacle Solutions' newly appointed Vice President of Strategic Innovation and Partnership Development. The nameplate on my desk reads Arisa Quinn, and every time I see it, I think about that day in the conference room, when Evonne called me easily replaceable. Let me tell you how spectacularly wrong she was. The Rosa Delgado Consortium partnership didn't just succeed, it exceeded every projection we'd made. The $8.2 million 3-year contract generated its first year's revenue in just 8 months. More importantly, the sustainable manufacturing technologies we help scale have been adopted by 12 additional companies, creating a ripple effect that's transforming an entire industry. Rosa Delgado herself was featured on the cover of Manufacturing Innovation magazine as, quote, Entrepreneur of the Year. In her interview, she specifically credited Pinnacle Solutions, and me personally, with providing the platform that allowed her consortium to reach markets they'd only dreamed of accessing. The partnership has grown to $15 million in active contracts, with projections reaching $35 million over the next 5 years. But the numbers, as satisfying as they are, aren't the most important part of this story. John Hall didn't just remove Evonne from her supervisory role. He launched a comprehensive investigation into management practices across the entire organization. What they discovered was sobering. Our department wasn't the only one suffering from toxic leadership. The investigation led to the departure of 3 additional managers and the implementation of new accountability systems that prioritize talent development over power consolidation. Layla Stone? She's back. John personally recruited her from Morrison & Associates with a 40% salary increase and the title of Director of Strategic Risk Assessment. She now leads a team of 5 analysts and has already prevented 2 potentially disastrous partnerships that could have cost the company millions. Mabel Hill returned as well as our new Director of Partnership Coordination, with resources and support that allow her natural talents to flourish. She's rebuilt the coordination systems that had been neglected under Evonne's management, and client satisfaction scores have increased by 60% under her leadership. Lander Croft was promoted to Senior Innovation Strategist, with full credit and ownership of his partnership modeling methodology. He's now developing new analytical tools that are being adopted industry-wide, and yes, his name is on all the patents and publications. Even Rogers Gus came back as our Chief Technology Integration Officer, implementing security protocols that have made Pinnacle a model for data protection in our industry. As for Evonne Thorne, the investigation revealed that her pattern of talent destruction had been going on for years, affecting dozens of employees across multiple projects. She was terminated for cause, and I heard through industry contacts that she struggled to find another position at her previous level. Word travels fast in corporate circles, especially when it involves documented patterns of workplace abuse. 3 months after her dismissal, I received a letter. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting. Inside was a single sentence. "You were right about everything." No apology, no acknowledgement of the damage she'd caused to so many careers. Just recognition that she'd fundamentally misjudged the situation. I didn't respond. Some people don't deserve the courtesy of a reply, but more importantly, I was focused on building something better, rather than dwelling on what had been broken. The most meaningful outcome of this entire experience has been the Pinnacle Innovation Initiative, a company-wide program I developed that identifies and nurtures unconventional talent regardless of background, pedigree, or traditional credentials. We've partnered with community colleges, vocational schools, and minority business development organizations to create pathways for people who might never have considered careers in strategic consulting. My mother attended the launch event for the initiative. Watching her meet Rosa Delgado, seeing them share stories about building something meaningful from nothing, understanding that the values she'd instilled in me had created opportunities for other women facing similar challenges. That moment validated every sacrifice she'd made, every double shift she'd worked, every dream she'd deferred for my education. "Mija," she whispered as we watched the program presentation, "this is what I always hoped for. Not just success for you, but success that lifts others up too." Now, if you've made it this far in my story, I want to speak directly to you. Maybe you're dealing with your own Evonne Thorne right now. Maybe you're sitting in a job where your talents are undervalued, your contributions are dismissed, or your ideas are stolen by people who think they deserve credit simply because they have more seniority or institutional power. If that's you, I want you to understand something fundamental. Their need to diminish you says nothing about your worth and everything about their insecurity. Confident leaders don't build themselves up by tearing others down. They create environments where everyone can succeed. But here's what I learned that I wish I'd understood years earlier. You have more power than you think. Your ideas have value. Your perspective matters. Your refusal to accept limitation can change not just your own life, but the lives of everyone around you. The $8.2 million contract in my briefcase wasn't just about money. It was about proving that innovation comes from unexpected places, that talent exists everywhere, and that the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to let someone else define your potential. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. so you don't miss any upload from us.